President of the USSR as number one. The greatest point of vulnerability for a spy is not when they steal the information, because a spy's been targeted and selected specifically because they have access to information. The difficulty in where most spies are caught is either they're caught with the information or with the special equipment they use to steal it. Consequently, the ability to hide secrets and hide tradecraft equipment becomes an integral part of a spy's training.
Training taught by all intelligence agencies. Retired KGB General Oleg Kalugin.
You have to be prepared to act clandestinely. It's in a secret way. And that means that you have to prepare in your home or in your office or wherever, places where you could hide the stuff prepared for an eventual transfer to the intelligence service. Whether this is in secret writing or this is film made by a miniature camera, or whatever, you have to look for places which would be safe enough from kids, for instance, or from animals.
The longer stolen secrets can be hidden, the longer a spy can operate in a hostile foreign environment.
There is always some minimum amount of equipment they have to have, because no matter how deeply buried a spy may be, they still occasionally have to communicate secretly, so they need a small pad with numbers. Now, ideally, if they think they could be caught, they may want to have money hidden, or they may want to have an extra passport in a different name.
Spies who have assumed the identity of another person and are living deep undercover in a foreign country use what's known as caching. Materials are hidden in a metal box, buried in a remote area.
The caches would be used to hide weapons, explosives, monies, food, and they would be used only in case of emergencies, not by regularly operated agents.
Tools of the spy trade must be accessible, yet well hidden. Items used on a regular basis must be kept within reach.
So the spy is constantly balancing accessibility with a way to be secret.
Spies have traditionally altered common pieces of furniture and everyday items into effective storage devices for their secrets. Referred to in the intelligence world as CDs, or concealment devices, countless items have been cleverly altered throughout history. Many of them, such as this altered can of powdered milk, are booby-trapped. Unless opened in the correct manner, the items inside are destroyed. Historian Keith Melton has been collecting the world's largest assortment of spy gear. A portion of his archive is housed in the historical section of the CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. The majority of his collection is housed in a top-secret spy museum.
The museum is in a location that's never disclosed. Visiting it is by invitation only. Each year we have about 24 visitors, and they are generally retired professionals from various intelligence services around the world. There is no visual indication as to the location of the museum or the numerous security safeguards that protect it. There is one external indication, and that is a sign that once was on the building of the KGB headquarters in Riga, Latvia. There are more than 30 unique concealments and hiding places built into the museum. And today, for the first time, we're going to reveal a few of them. Because the museum is used as a teaching tool, it's very instructive to look at some of the very clever ways that spies can hide secrets and other things.
Thousands of artifacts from nearly every intelligence agency in the world lie in endless rows of shelves. Concealments used by spies during operations are everywhere. Like in the world of espionage itself, inside the museum, nothing should be assumed.
Here in the Spy Museum, when we constructed it, there are more than 30 unique forms of concealment. concealment, ways to hide just about anything up to several people. But one of the ones I like is items that are so simple and effective that they're here, they're readily available, but they're very difficult to find. And in a library with all the woodwork, it offers wonderful opportunities to confuse the eye, because the eye sees symmetrical patterns and you don't think that there may be more than the eye can see. Here's an example of a column, a fluted column between the sections of books. You see just a normal bookcase, but actually it opens to reveal a large cavity that could fit hundreds of documents. And it's one of the types of concealments that spies specifically like. Easy to get to, but very effective. If you think back to the movies, traditionally you see pictures of moving cases of books and things that swing open. Well, that's a lot easier to do in Hollywood than reality, and investigators know that. One of the things they seldom look for is actually moving shelves of books. It's very difficult. A fully laden single case of books may weigh half a ton, and to make it move fluidly and smoothly is quite difficult. Well, here's an example of one that has worked well, because when we built the museum, we designed all the shelves with that in mind. And this is an example of a very effective, smooth opening hiding place. And inside is where we monitor all the audio and visual happenings of the museum. It's our spy headquarters here. Any form of decorative accessory around a house could be used as a concealment. Now, most investigators would automatically look in this fake potted plant, and it could hide a secret, but it's not where the secret is hidden. Because what an alert East German technical officer did was actually build the concealment in this wooden plant stand. And it has a reverse thread. So if you normally tried to open it, what you'd be doing is tightening it. But inside is a large cavity. And the cavity has more than enough room for 2 passports, money, film, and coded escape instructions. And this piece remained undetected in an East German agent living in West Germany throughout the latter years of the Cold War. This small, low piece of furniture was constructed in East Germany, and it was used for an East German agent living in Berlin. And it was so skillfully built that it survived the Cold War. And at the conclusion, the agent pointed very proudly to where his secrets had been held. Inside, there are 4 different concealments. So far, I've only been able to find 3. One of the most effective is the fact that when you search a drawer, you normally look in it, you may look underneath it, but you seldom think to check the thickness of the drawer. This has been concealed by literally constructing a false bottom, creating a cavity, and in this concealment would hold multiple documents or passports.
Newly recruited spies usually don't have the skills to turn innocuous items into secret hiding devices. That's when agency craftsmen are called in to do the job.
They would find or buy for you or specially manufacture something where you could keep your classified information, something you would not wish others to know about. A lot of really intricate stuff to deliver to the agents to keep that information hidden. Suppose a jealous wife, for some reason you did not succeed in keeping your relations with an intelligence agency well hidden from your wife. She has an intuition that you are meeting someone and you do not want her to know about it. She may suspect there's a mistress or someone. And she may start looking in your pockets or other places which she may suspect you keep something inside. Well, you have to be aware of these things, and you have to find places which are accessible only to you.
This appears to be a full but very pliable, moldable tube of grease. The tube comes off. In fact, it looks as if it's brand new and has never been opened. However, this is actually a concealment that would be in use by a spy, because inside is actually a very large cavity that would hold a large quantity of money, microfilm, coded instructions. This is a piece that was produced by the KGB for use by an agent operating in Western Europe. Now, a trained illegal, with technical help, would know that investigators never searched children's rooms with the same care and attention to detail that they do that of an adult. Now, this is a piece of tradecraft produced by the Russians. And it's simply a toy train, the same type of common wooden hand-carved toy train probably in most countries of the world. But if you pull the forward stack, inside is a cavity that will exactly hold a microdot camera and a spare roll of film. This is the type of extremely clever concealment that an investigator always fears is there, but you don't find.
No matter how clever a concealment device is, if it stands out from its surrounding environment, it is in danger of being discovered.
German investigators during the Cold War once searched an apartment in Berlin. They had a suspected female East German spy. They couldn't prove it, but they looked at the sparseness of the apartment. They looked at the sparseness of the refrigerator. There was nothing but mineral water and a lemon inside. But then they noticed in the kitchen is a heaping bowl of walnuts. And it turned out that her one-time cipher pads were hidden inside one of the walnuts that had been opened and then sealed back together. And in a very sparsely furnished apartment, a heaping bowl of walnuts was out of place.
Throughout history, there have been examples of spies hiding their secrets in unorthodox locations.
In the vocabulary of espionage, the Soviet intelligence services have their most valuable spy, one who is living under deep cover and has assumed a false identity. They label this type of spy an illegal, and it is from their S directorate, and it is their most secretive and most important directorate. At the end of World War II, the Soviet intelligence services realized that they needed to penetrate effectively the government and the military organizations in the new nations of Western Europe. And they immediately began placing illegals into the movement of transients. Their homes were bombed and they were moving through the countries of Europe in a way for them to lose their Soviet identities and pick up a new identity.
One of the most successful illegal couples in the history of the Soviet Union was Arshat Akopian, codenamed Yefrat, and his wife, codenamed Tanya. Their espionage began in 1948, first in Romania and then in Iran. Akopian had been issued a Minox camera to photograph the documents he was stealing. He determined that if he could keep the camera hidden, he could continue to operate indefinitely.
He finally came up with a technique that to this day is still taught in the SVR intelligence schools as an example of how creativity can be used to find a hiding place. Now, Yefrat knew that at his office, many people came in and out. So if he had a hiding place, it had to be something that was accessible but was relatively foolproof. And he looked around the office, and the only thing that seemed unusual was the fact that he had a ceiling, that we call a laid ceiling, in that you could actually lift up the fiber asbestos panels and have access up into the top of the ceiling.
Akopian found that there was space between the ceiling panels and the walls. He devised a plan to hide his camera within these walls.
He took his Minox camera and he put it inside a prophylactic. He put that prophylactic inside another prophylactic. And at the top, he tied a piece of string, a heavy twine. The twine was 12 feet long, and the twine at the end was a solid metal tag. Akopian would stand on his desk, very carefully lift the asbestos panel up, and reach in and hold the Minox camera in the prophylactic just over the edge into the ceiling down in the hollow space. Then he'd slowly reel out the string and let the Minox go till he was sure that it was now safely between the walls down at the baseboard level, but it was at a position that there was absolutely no access to it. Once he knew it was there, he would toss over the end of the string with a metal washer. At this point, there is nothing in his office that could be discovered without physically and invasively tearing into the walls to try to find it. But what was brilliant about his idea was when he wanted to retrieve the Minox, he took a common magnet that wouldn't be out of place in any handyman's toolbox or even in an office desk, and he tied a piece of twine to it. And he would literally stand up on the desk, move the ceiling tile, he'd drop the magnet, and he'd let it go down with string. Usually by the second or third try, he'd have attached the magnet to the metal tag. Then he'd pull the twine and he'd recover the Minox. He did this successfully for the remainder of his career.
After many successful years, Akopian and his wife were recalled to Russia.
And so as he was being returned, he knew that he had to leave Italy, he worked in Italy and France, go through a neutral country such as Switzerland, change his identities, and then get back into Russia. Because he wanted to leave no trail that anything had ever been out of place. And he knew he could destroy his Minox camera. But most valuable to him were several rolls of small Minox film that carried his final reports, the summary of everything he had done, and the final intelligence he was bringing. So he's faced with a problem. How does he carry these secrets with him safely? So he took a popular brand of chocolate. He froze the chocolate bar. He then created a plaster of Paris mold that duplicated the entire face of the chocolate.
Once the cast was completed, the chocolate was melted and a thin layer was poured into the mold.
He took his small rolls of Minox film, broke them apart, separated them from the empty portion so he only had the exposed film that was protected. He took the tiny pieces of Minox film cassettes and inserted them in the chocolate bar, then poured the rest of the chocolate. He let it dry, put it in the freezer, got it hard again.
Once the chocolate was back to its original form, he removed the mold and rewrapped the bar. They then packed it with 2 other similar bars of chocolate and proceeded to leave the country. They successfully traveled from Italy to Switzerland, but while checking through customs, their luck was about to change.
Akopian is targeted by one of the customs investigators, and he's asked to open his small handbag that he's carrying some personal items and the 3 bars of chocolate. The investigator looks down and says, "Sir, I am sorry. You are violating Swiss law. You cannot enter with 3 bars of chocolate. We have wonderful chocolates here. You're only allowed to bring in 2 bars. You must try some of our Swiss chocolates. I must take 1 bar." Akopian doesn't know which of the bars he's gotten. Is it the one with the Minox film, or is it just a normal one? So as the investigator holds it, he thinks quickly, reaches suddenly and takes it from his hand and says, "Well, that's all right. I'll eat it here." Peels it and starts eating the chocolate. And as luck would have it, it was a plain bar of chocolate. He consumed it and proceeded for the rest of his trip without problems.
One of the most devastating spies in U.S. Army history was Sergeant First Class Clyde Lee Conrad.
An NCO in Europe, a seemingly low-level soldier, and yet he had access to NATO war plans because he worked in the office where these plans were prepared on a yearly basis.
Though officers would come and go, he managed to stay in Germany for years. And he was so good and so efficient that every new and successive officer that came would immediately defer to him because he knew the plans. He was meticulous in keeping them.
Retired Army Colonel Stuart Harrington is the author of Traitors Among Us, Inside the Spycatcher's World.
The top secret document custodian in an organization like the G3, the War Plans and the Training and Operations section of an infantry division, is the person who literally has his hands on the combinations to the safe and, if you will, the keys to the crown jewels. Every single top secret document that's controlled in that division, in that G3 section, is Conrad's personal responsibility.
In the early 70s, Conrad's supervisor at the G3 section in Germany was former Captain Zoltan Szabo. A Hungarian immigrant, he joined the U.S. Army at 19 and was promoted through the intelligence ranks. Motivated by greed and nationalism, Szabo became a spy for Hungarian military intelligence and for 16 years delivered thousands of classified, top-secret documents. Nearing his retirement, Szabo did not have to look far for his replacement.
Szabo sees Conrad as someone who needs money, who is clearly susceptible to influence. Conrad's wife for a while is scrubbing stairwells to make ends meet. Conrad is known as Poor Clyde, who's never got a couple of bucks to go to happy hour.
Conrad was approached by Szabo and Sandor Kercsik, another Hungarian, who would serve as Conrad's courier.
By the time they're ready to make the pitch, Conrad is saying yes before they've even finished popping the question.
Conrad immediately began stealing classified information from the files he was sworn to protect.
One of his efficiency reports stated that Conrad was always working long hours aggressively, on behalf of the mission. What Conrad was doing was he was carrying out his copying during evening hours when people weren't there who might notice it. And in one case, he managed to seduce a female sergeant, and by seducing her, convinced her to wink at the rules so that Conrad could keep documents out of her top secret vault overnight in his work area. He was quite bold, and again, as a guy who had the support of his officers there and was regarded as a mainstay of the headquarters, he was able to get away with a lot.
Conrad's deception continued non-stop for over 15 years, selling Hungarian intelligence the Army's most sensitive and classified military secrets.
On a yearly basis, every time those NATO war plans were updated, he was providing copies of them to the Soviets.
Utilizing the latest technology was also a part of the mystique Conrad created for himself.
Conrad had received from the Hungarians a simple calculator, one that was becoming ubiquitous. As the price dropped, everyone used them, and this would function as any other calculator, except when he entered a special code name. Now, the name he selected was the middle name of his young son, Damien. And when he entered Damien into the calculator, it allowed him to access a secret part of the computer memory. And here is where he stored all of his contact numbers, how he would contact his Hungarian controller, as well as secret ways to contact the Hungarian station in an emergency, and even his escape phone numbers.
In 1985, the CIA obtained information from deep within Soviet intelligence that a spy ring was operating in Central Europe, and for years had been stealing information from the Army's most sensitive departments.
The profile said whoever the spy is has been in Europe since at least the mid-70s, has been stealing war plans. Most of the war plans appear to come from the area of the 5th U.S. Corps. The spy, since it's the Hungarian Military Intelligence Service, might have some ties, either be ethnic Hungarian himself or some ties to Hungary. So it was this kind of a profile.
One of the strictest and most secretive intelligence operations run by Army Foreign Counterintelligence was opened and headed by Colonel Harrington. Select agents from the CIA, Army, and FBI were flown between headquarters in Fort Meade, Maryland, and Germany. This all had to be done under the strictest confidence. Any leak of an impending counterintelligence operation would be disastrous.
The West German security services were regarded by us as penetrated. And since the investigation was such a long investigation, had we gone to the Germans for help, there was certitude that the East Germans would find out about it, Conrad would be warned, and Conrad would flee to Budapest. So we had to operate around the Germans, and that was not easy sometimes.
It was a painstaking and detailed investigation. For 15 months, over 25,000 Army personnel files were examined, looking for anyone who might fit the profile of a traitor.
One day in January 1986, poring over an enlisted soldier's file, Clyde Lee Conrad's, Conrad had been assigned to the 8th Infantry Division almost nonstop from the late 1960s through his retirement in 1985. The more he looked at it, the more it dawned on him that this could very well be the guy.
Obtaining a conviction for espionage in the United States is difficult. It was important to gather clear and convincing evidence. The team started interviewing soldiers who had served under the sergeant, inquiring if at one time he had approached them about making easy money. One of those soldiers was Master Sergeant Danny Wilson.
We told him that we thought Clyde, his friend, was a spy. He was horrified and said, "No way, not my friend Clyde." And we said, "Well, we want you to work for us, and if you'll work for us, you'll have an opportunity to prove that Clyde is innocent, as you believe." And that began Danny Wilson's career as our agent, whom we put up next to Conrad. We transferred him to Germany. We had him re-enter Conrad's life and essentially play to Conrad's ego and see if Conrad might take the bait and see Danny as someone who years before had been approached but not reported the approach. Maybe he would re-approach Danny.
After 6 months, Conrad couldn't control his ego. He felt comfortable enough to start bragging to Danny about his career as an agent for the Hungarians.
And he also was very quick to brag to Danny Wilson, whom he thought was his protege, that he had this Palm device. And in there, Clyde showed Danny how there was an encrypted section, and you put a code word in it, and you could actually type in information. Conrad even bragged that in an emergency situation, all you had to do was turn it over, and this little hole here, just put the tip of a ballpoint pen in and push, and it would zero out the memory of the Casio. So if you thought you were in danger, you could zero it out.
Conrad never realized his rediscovered friend was working for Army counterintelligence.
He described a concept to Danny Wilson, which was to take a video camera and on the VCR cassette to have the beginnings of a movie, and then to sit with the camera over his shoulder and take a top secret document and page through the document slowly so that the camera, the video camera, would copy it, and then put at the end of the tape the ending of the movie. So sandwiched in the middle of the movie were secret documents or top secret documents done by video camera.
By August of 1988, there was enough evidence against Conrad to have him arrested. It was determined that Conrad would be prosecuted by the German government. The German authorities would make the arrest. A detailed search of Conrad's house led the authorities to some of his hiding spots.
Conrad had bragged that he had received more than $1.5 million in the first 9 years of his espionage. They couldn't find the money, but one thing they did find was a hollow file. This was in his toolbox. It appears to be common, just a simple woodworker's file, but when the handle is unscrewed, it also hid communication schedules that Conrad was using to make his contacts with Hungarian military intelligence.
Conrad's secret calculator was also found. Because Danny Wilson had remembered the code, all of Conrad's contact information was accessed.
And Conrad was in the Bad Kreuznach jail that night.
All of the major players in the spy ring were arrested and searched. The Kerchik brothers, couriers for Conrad since the beginning, proved to be sloppy when it came to hiding their information. It was a simple screwdriver, left curiously out of place.
When they found the screwdriver, and they found it in a bedside table, something was wrong. An alert investigator said that that is out of place. As they examined it, the handle twisted off, and inside they found a communication schedule. Well, the communication schedule has to be mated to use with a shortwave radio. So they had a clue that somewhere in the house there was a radio. And in the attic, they found the radio, and hidden with the radio were years of messages that should have been destroyed. And the thread that led them all to it was an item that would have been probably ignored in an automobile or in a garage, but was out of place in a bedside table.
The overwhelming evidence against Conrad convinced the 3 German judges to sentence him to life in prison.
Clyde Conrad was the first, and to date the only, person in the history of the Federal Republic of Germany to receive a sentence of life in prison for espionage or for state treason.
With the information he had given them, they would have been able to anticipate the deployment positions of NATO forces in time of war.
And at that time, which was in the 80s, there was a certain concern that that could happen, that the Russians might invade through the Fulda Gap and we could have a war. Our defenses were completely transparent to the Soviets because they had that war plan.
In 1998, 10 years after his arrest, Clyde Conrad died in a German prison of a heart attack. Unfortunately, his devastating damage to NATO was matched by another serviceman who betrayed United States naval security.
One spy's treachery betrayed the United States to the extent that in the 1970s and early 1980s, had we gone to war, we probably would have lost a nuclear conflict because of the secrets betrayed by John Walker. Walker is the most damaging spy so far that we know existed in the United States.
Former FBI agent Gerald Richards was assigned to the Walker case.
Well, there's various ways that people such as Walker get into espionage. In Walker's case, he was known as a walk-in. He literally walked into the Russian embassy here in Washington, D.C., and brought along with him his credentials, his military ID, and a stack of code cards for the cryptographic machines he had, and asked to see somebody in security.
After reviewing his credentials, the Soviets realized that he was genuine.
We could easily establish the identity of Mr. Walker as a man who indeed had access. Besides, he brought key lists, and the key lists were one of the best proofs that he was indeed a genuine walk-in, not a provocateur.
Cryptanalysis materials are the prize. They are the real prize because you can get a tremendous amount of information if you can break the other guy's code or be able to tap in on the other guy's codes.
They had intercepted our coded messages, but they had never been able to read them. And with Walker providing the code cards, this was one half of what they needed to read the messages. The other half they needed were the machines themselves. The Walker could give them repair manuals. He couldn't give them the machines. So within a month of John Walker volunteering his services, the Soviets arranged through the North Koreans to hijack a U.S. Navy ship with its cipher machines, and that was the USS Pueblo. And in early 1968, they captured the Pueblo, they took it into Pusan Harbor, they quickly took the machines off, flew them to Moscow. Now Moscow had both parts of the puzzles. They had the machine, and they had an American spy in place in Norfolk with the code cards and with access to them.
He was shuttled back out of the embassy in the backseat of a car with a disguise, and he was provided approximately, I believe, $1,000, and later on he received considerably more money than that. He was contacted again at a later time, at a prearranged time, and that started his career for the next 17-plus years in espionage.
He was invited to meet in a week or 10 days at a prearranged place. He accepted, and we met in a week or so, where we discussed at length our future collaboration.
Concepts and tradecraft used by spies were explained in detail.
We told him that he should not bring classified papers, that he should take pictures of the classified papers and bring them in undeveloped film. That's important. We told him that we shall arrange and organize a series of dead drops. And by the time the meeting did take place, we already had a dozen or so dead drops prepared by our handler.
After the original meeting with the KGB, Walker would operate for several years without ever again meeting face to face. Walker enticed family members and friends to join him in stealing secrets for the Soviets. It became one of the most devastating spy rings in United States history.
Tragedy can strike at any time.
Your life can change in a twinkling of an eye.
There is always a trigger. The trick is finding it. Join the experts as they dissect these disasters to find out what went wrong.
The single camera most identified during the Cold War with espionage is the Minox. And this is the Model C camera that John Walker was advised to buy by the KGB. Very smooth, very efficient, very reliable, takes a great picture.
This particular model is the Minox C, which is the exact camera that John used. The case is very handy because it has a chain attached to it. Along the chain, you can notice that there's a number of little balls along the chain. One is at 8 inches, 10 inches, 12 inches, and 18 inches away. And those are the first 4 settings for focusing on the Minox camera: 8, 10, 12, and 18 inches. So if you're photographing a document, which at 18 inches, 8.5 by 11 document fits perfectly into this frame, you can use the chain in order to determine exactly how far away from the document you have to be by just lowering the chain down to the last notch that would lay on top of the document and then making the photograph. Keeps it in perfect focus.
And most importantly is the film that's used with it is this small. All of the film is in one side, and as you use it, it travels to the other side. So once it's been used, you can throw the rest away. Now, this would hold 50 shots of documents. Walker took more than 200,000 pictures.
Walker came up with the idea of using single frames from an 8mm film camera to shoot the documents.
With a 8mm camera, you can get several thousand photographs from each frame of that 8mm camera and still have one very small roll of film. And John reasoned that if he could reduce the amount of bulk he had and add more material to it, it would be a lot easier for him to transport.
Walker passed the documents and film to the Soviets through pre-assigned dead drops. He kept coded notes to remind himself who and how much everyone had been paid. The operation ran like a charm and was seemingly unstoppable.
It lasted almost 18 years, and we became aware of the spy ring itself through a telephone call by his former wife. Barbara Walker called the local office of the FBI and advised that her husband was a spy, and at that particular time she was drunk. When she was interviewed, she was fairly emphatic about some of the facts.
Since the FBI gets a lot of calls like that, it took them a while to really realize that this was the one of the 1 in 100 that was a serious call.
The FBI put surveillance on Walker. Eventually, he led them to a dead drop and was arrested.
When he actually was caught and when he was being debriefed and interviewed, he made no bones about it, that this was the family business, and his heir to the family business was going to be his son, Michael.
The other members of the ring were also arrested. An FBI team led by Gerald Richards was sent to go through Walker's house to search for any clues as to the secrets Walker had been selling to the Soviets.
When Walker's house was searched for espionage equipment, we had really no real good idea of what we would find, if it would be highly technical, if it would be very low tech, but we went in there with the attitude we were going to look for everything and look as close to it as we could. Now, in this particular case, we were under court order. That means there's a limit to how much you can tear a house apart. I always would prefer to bulldoze it down and take all the pieces and cut them up and take them away, but unfortunately they wouldn't allow us to do that.
The search team entered, and almost immediately, evidence of Walker's espionage began to surface.
John Walker wasn't a real good spy. Much of the material he should have destroyed regarding his previous drop sites or signal sites and locations, he had neatly tucked away in a bookshelf. Much of the notes he took were found in his desk drawer, along with the rotoreader. So much of the stuff was found readily in his den or in his rec room.
John Walker, the embodiment of 007 in his own mind, was really a sloppy spy. Because despite how much he talked the professional parlance of a spy, and despite how many books he read, at home he had been very sloppy. He had saved copies of most of the secret messages the Russians had sent him. He had saved copies of his dead drop instructions. They found on his computer ribbon copies of where he had answered the replies. They found some hiding places in his house, but they were relatively simple.
When we went upstairs to search a work area he had upstairs, in his closet, on a shelf, was a stack of classified documents that his son had brought, but he did not have time to deliver. Again, a huge bulk, which made it very difficult for him to deliver. And laying on one of the benches was the Minox camera, the Minox C, that he used regularly to photograph those documents. So again, most of the stuff that was found not hidden, not in concealments, but pretty much out in the open.
There is still belief by many that some of Walker's stolen secrets were never found.
Walker had an airplane, a small Cheetah, and flew over the eastern seaboard of the United States and once actually flew all the way to Bermuda. With the range that he had in this plane, Walker could have flown it anywhere and hidden things anywhere. Walker once led his investigators to believe that perhaps he had cached secrets in hiding places around the eastern part of the United States, thinking either at a later point he could sell them to the Soviets for money, or perhaps use the secrets to bargain his way out if he was caught. There was also a specific thought that in the bar that he and his wife had once owned and operated very near the Charleston Naval Base, that in the sand dunes behind the bar, there could have been a cache of documents. But at that point, following the arrest, the U.S. Justice Department decided against using scarce resources to either send the teams down to totally excavate the area behind the bar, or even, for that matter, to destroy the house and totally excavate his backyard.
John Walker was sentenced to life in prison. As far as the authorities are concerned, the case is closed.
Walker is in prison. He's supposedly cooperated, but still, as in any spy case, there are always unanswered questions and mysteries that still exist.
Mysteries that will continue as long as intelligence services use pawns to steal and hide secrets that can give their country an edge.
I think that at times there's the thought that spy versus spy is some sort of an exciting game that we play. And we try to recruit their spies, and they try to recruit our spies. And people might ask themselves, what really does it matter? But the truth is, when we try to recruit a Russian intelligence officer, it's not just to know about his service, but we want to know about the spies that they have in our country. And we want to know about the John Walker, who's providing Navy codes to the Russians, or the Clyde Conrad, who's providing NATO war plans.
The Russian intelligence will continue to operate in the United States, trying to use whatever means available in Europe and elsewhere to play these countries against the United States and to take advantage of the differences between the United States and other countries for the benefit of Russia. And this is exactly what the whole intelligence business is now about. No more ideology, but competitiveness, the Russian desire to emerge from economic and social crisis as a superpower again. The Russian intelligence will be as active and even more than before.
Passing secrets, a necessity for all spies.
A spy is targeted and selected and recruited because he has access to the secrets. And once he becomes a spy, he steals the secrets. But for them to ever be any good, he somehow has to pass them to the controlling intelligence service that he's working for.
Agent communication is the most dangerous part of any mission.
And it's not only your own life, it's also the well-being of your family.
Even today, spies continue to operate secretly within the United States.
Russian businessmen, bankers, journalists, you would suspect some of whom are intelligence officers, but you're not sure which ones are, and you can't follow all of them all the time.
Top secret documents, microfilm, secret writing, photographs. Agents must use any means necessary to convey the stolen information.
You cannot have espionage in any way, shape, or form unless you can communicate. All spies are recruited because of their access. That's the only reason they're being recruited, is to what information they can provide to the service that is trying to recruit them. But most people aren't inherently good spies.
Lots of problems are involved in trying to locate or spot the right person. An individual who'd be willing to sell his own country's secrets for whatever reason, ideological reasons, or maybe because he was unhappy in his agency, was not promoted, was slighted or discriminated against because of the color of his skin or his sexual orientation or his political views or maybe even his appearance. People feel unhappy at times and they may switch their loyalties to the other side if the other side offers something better.
If you think of the acronym MICE, M-I-C-E, M stands for money, I is for ideology, C is for compromise, and E is for ego. If you take those four basic weaknesses and combine them with failed careers and alcoholism, any of those vulnerabilities could be selected by a very smart intelligence service to find your particular weakness. Recruitment can come in many forms. It could be the person that you meet at a bar who likes your same hobbies and is interested in your work. It could be the friend you make when all of a sudden you find yourself behind in your bills and this miraculous person appears. It could be that beautiful girl that sat next to you on the plane and is just so interested in your work.
Once you establish a relationship with a case officer, the next is how to keep it secret, really hidden from public view, from the view of the counterintelligence services. And we know in the United States, the counterintelligence service has been very strong.
Counterintelligence believes that a good offense is the best approach to uncovering spies within their agency.
A counterintelligence service will try to recruit a foreign intelligence officer if that officer may have knowledge of spies working in the host intelligence service's country. And that's one of the strong currencies that a defector can use to in effect buy his position in freedom, is say, I come to you with secrets, but especially I'm going to name our spies that are in your service or working in your country.
The truth is, with thousands and thousands of Americans that have security clearances and have access to secrets, it's virtually impossible, certainly impossible, to prevent one of them from going out and doing the wrong thing. But if you have good penetrations of the other services who can tell you about their operations against you, that puts you in the best position to defend yourself and protect yourself.
When the KGB recruits an American spy, they must be immediately taught how to transfer the information they steal.
You have to establish such a line of communications which would provide absolute security. There's nothing absolute in this world, obviously, but the maximum security in communicating. And for that reason, we used all sorts of gimmicks or tricks or tradecraft.
One of the most critical parts of an espionage case, and the most dangerous part of an espionage case, is passing information.
Microfilm under a phony callus.
The CIA's predecessor, the OSS, produced dozens of training films to drive home the message to officers that there is a right way and a wrong way to conduct oneself when passing secrets.
Throughout history, counterintelligence services have known that spies have to hide secrets on their body or in their body. In almost any way you can think of doing it, it's been done before professionally, and some counterintelligence service has developed a way to find it.
No smoking. Don't try that again. You're not the first who's tried to burn a message in a cigarette.
Trained counterintelligence services are taught to carefully examine any form of an item, a smoking accessory that a person may carry. Now, this normally appearing pipe is actually a concealment. And when opened, it's designed to have a cavity that allows a small piece of microfilm to be concealed, but allows the wearer to smoke at the same time. Now, an effective way for a spy to use this would literally be to approach the checkpoint smoking, because a guard is less likely to search a lit pipe. But if the spy is already under suspicion, a trained investigator would find this in the first search.
But you see, the enemy knows the more important a piece of evidence is to you, the more important it is to them.
Shoes make an effective hiding place. And for years, anywhere that you could look at a shoe, there's numerous places for hiding. One of the most effective, this is a KGB shoe, and the heel has been notched to be removed. There's a metal supporting rod that supports the cavity to ensure that as the wearer walks, you don't get a natural depression. But it's been hollowed out and is exactly the correct size to hold 2 half cassettes of Minox film. You could have up to 300 pages of documents photographed with ultra-thin base film inside this small cavity. Once it's tacked back on, it's effective to wear, and unless there is an invasive search, would be extremely difficult to detect. During World War I, German counterintelligence detected spies crossing the lines that had had messages tattooed on their heads and then allowing hair to grow back, so that it was only when the head was shaved that the message could be revealed. And photographs still exist of that happening. Equally so, it was found that you could use the back of human skin to write a message in invisible ink. You could not see it, but once you applied the reagent, you could literally recover the secret letter or the message written on someone's back. And if they would pick a female agent, it was much less likely that a male agent would be searching her private parts or looking on the skin for secret writing. Some of the very old techniques are still very effective. Just because something is old and out of use doesn't mean that it wouldn't work today. Any orifice of the body can be used to hide information. Now, there's some that probably come to mind, but one of those that people normally don't think of is the human eye. And in World War I, German counterintelligence detected a Russian spy crossing the border that had his message concealed in a false eye. And this glass eye can be used very effectively to conceal a small piece of microfilm, bleached and pasted inside. And it's the type of item that a counterintelligence investigator, regardless of how seasoned or trained, may not effectively see the first time. But under close examination, this too would also be detected.
Our friend here seems a little perturbed about his feet. It might be wise to show as much concern for this region as he shows by so nervously biting his lip.
Unless the spy truly believes it's effective, he will act in an unnatural way. He'll favor the wrong foot. He'll turn his body. He'll make some unnatural action that may be detected by an alert investigator. And an investigator can sense nervousness, can sense uncomfortableness, and this becomes one of the investigator's most valuable tools. The amount of space needed for a cavity or a concealment on a person doesn't have to be large, and anything you could carry or wear could be used. Now, this is a simple Finnish coin that was actually used by an illegal spy in the United States by the name of Raino Heihanen. It appears normal, except if you take a small needle and place it in a tiny, almost invisible hole and push, you can open what appears to be a solid coin into 2 halves. And perfectly inside would fit a piece of microfilm that could have literally 50 pages of paper documents photographed on this. And tradecraft devices like this were effectively used throughout the Cold War for spies that were very important to use to pass important and sensitive information. And it's so effective, it's probably still in use today.
Bills are then soaked in boiling water to separate the layers and expose possible hidden information.
By boiling, it's possible to separate the halves, the 2 sides of some currencies. By selecting a currency that was thicker and you were able to split apart, you could insert a tiny microdot and then glue the money back together and press it together. If the microdot was placed in a portion of the bill in which there was dark printing, it would be invisible even if held to the strong light. The only way it could possibly be felt even was by touch. But if the bill was sufficiently wrinkled, it could be effectively carried and was used, especially during World War II in occupied Western Europe.
It takes more than courage and confidence to operate in enemy area. It takes cover. Cover which you blew by your conspicuousness.
You cannot have espionage in any way, shape, or form unless you can communicate. And there's two types of communication. There's communicating instructions and information from the handlers to the person who is committing espionage. And then the person who's committing espionage must also communicate the materials that he is stealing to his handlers. So there is a two-way communication that's involved there.
Perhaps the most commonly used method of passing a secret is the dead drop.
A dead drop is nothing more than a pre-assigned location where the person can actually place the information, and his handler will come and pick it up, a designated pickup point, once he is aware that that information is at that spot. Therefore, they never meet face to face. They never are at the same place at the same time.
You have to have some explanation why you are in this particular place. In the old days, for instance, we would use, say, public toilets. Now it has been largely dropped because it's not a safe place. And for that reason, the Soviet intelligence practiced widely, and not only in the United States and elsewhere, some fairly remote areas in the suburbs of major cities.
The important thing is when the spy leaves the information, it has to be left in a public area, somewhere that's accessible to the spy and to the handler, but it has to be secret enough that a passerby just won't stop by and pick it up. So any organic item that has no value, no apparent value to a passerby could be used. And the more common the item, the better. So if you're in a foresty or a wooded area, an effective dead drop may be what appears to be just a piece of a branch. However, it's hollow, and you could put in microfilm or a secret message or a one-time pad. Very effective, but only in the right area. It may be in a wooded or grassy area that there's no visible place. However, you could be right at the base of a tree on the north side, 1 foot away from the base, and take this spike. It's a metal spike. Inside, it's designed to hold a roll of 35mm film. But once it's inside, you simply step on it, and it has no visible indication other than this small metallic top. A dead drop, ideally, is only in place for a matter of minutes or hours. It's never left indefinitely.
Signals are used to allow the spy to communicate with his handler when a dead drop has been completed.
These signals may be a chalk mark on a utility pole, on a mailbox, on a bridge, or something which is visible without straining your eyes. You pass by in a car, you drive by, and you see a sign, and no one, even if someone follows you, would never suspect that you were looking at the sign and reading the signal put for your benefit.
These signals may also be used to alert the agent that there is a problem or a change of plans.
It may be a signal of danger, that you should not service the dead drop because the dead drop was exposed, so you stay away from it.
Officers working for the KGB learned skills such as signals and agent communications during years of intelligence training in Moscow. All CIA officers marked to operate overseas must go through similar training at the top-secret training facility known as the Farm. Chase Brandon is a senior operations officer who often teaches new recruits how to communicate and receive secrets from spies.
One of the most important things that a CIA operations officer has to do while they're living and working abroad is know the city, the region, the area they're working in like the back of their hand, because the local intelligence service that will be trying to find the presence of a CIA officer and identify that officer's agent network, that hostile intelligence service is certainly going to know their own city. CIA officers sort of tend to generally work in and around urban areas, if you will, cities where there are restaurants and public places really to conduct private meetings, whereas our Soviet KGB counterparts preferred rural areas.
It would not be uncommon for intelligence officers to spend days picking the ideal location for a dead drop. It must be an area where the spy, if questioned, could legitimize being, yet must be secluded enough to avoid attracting attention when the drop is made.
We have to spend a lot of time casing. You've heard that old term in the movies, the cop movies, case the joint. Well, we're always looking to get area familiarization because we have to find places where we can meet agents and assets and pass information, pass secrets in a safe and secure area. And as we're driving along here, I see one that might be suitable for our purposes. It's a little underground parking garage. So let's, in fact, go in and see if that might not be a place where a prospective agent meeting with me or one of my colleagues could take place. We've got an elevator and a stairwell. That's good. That gives a couple of different ways for an agent to come down and link up with me. What we might want to do is move on down to the very bottom and see if there's a little less pedestrian traffic and less vehicle presence, so we have a little more privacy. Okay, we're getting down to the very bottom level of this standard parking garage. A good plan to put into effect would be to inform my agent that he or she could meet me at this garage on a particular day at a particular time. They would know the description of my car. They certainly would know me, since I'm the person who handles them, meets with them. And I would just come down and find a particular spot to park in. I want to take a quick look around. Not any pedestrian traffic down here, that's good. Quiet. Go over and make sure this door does indeed open. It is in fact the stairwell, that's good. And we'll go try the elevator. It's good, this will be nice because the asset comes down, the agent comes down, he or she could look around the corner and first thing they're going to see is my car. I might even have something up in the window there that would clearly make it mine, and they would walk over and get in the car and we can conduct the meeting.
Where are you going to go now to go check?
We're going to go upstairs and see what's up here. Well, here we are at the top of the parking garage. Let's see what we can use here operationally. Trash can you could leave something behind or on top of. This might be an interesting area to leave a message. I could actually be calling somebody. Leave the message here. Out here is an area where the agent could come through and meet me or transition over toward the elevators, and I see the spot here would be an interesting place to leave a message, and we could do that with a pen with a message concealed inside. That could be left right there like that. The agent comes up, knows that it's here, assuming they're tall enough, they reach up, they take this, and then they walk right on through. One or the other of us will find a logical place to stop and sit. It could be like an outdoor cafe. This one's not busy now, but that's all right. Anyway, you're simply going to sit down, take out the concealment device, open it up. There's going to be some kind of message in here. You read the information, you get the secret, take note of it, and then you're going to destroy this because this will be CIA unique communications paper, and you can just simply destroy it, and you can't be then caught with any kind of incriminating information on you.
Operations involving dead drops, brush passes, and other methods of passing stolen secrets occurred routinely throughout the Cold War in major cities such as Moscow, and Washington, D.C.
From my own experience, in the old days, I used extensively the National Press Building right in downtown area. You have to have legitimate reasons to be in a particular public place. The National Press Building was a legitimate place. I was the press officer of the Soviet embassy. He was the press officer of his own Western embassy. So we would meet there occasionally, and we would meet even for lunch if necessary. But in the meantime, we would exchange information in isolated, secluded places where no one would watch us.
The Soviets, when they would run their KGB operations and they met with their agents here in the United States, they tended to prefer sort of rural areas. In Northern Virginia and the Maryland area surrounding the nation's capital is full of wooded areas like this with out-of-the-way roads. Some of them had little parks like this one nearby. And the KGB officer meeting with his agent would simply leave something in the ground near a predetermined place like this unique stump. And there might be associated normal ground litter like the remnants of a picnic here. But in a key location behind the landmark would be something like this. Very much an ordinary item to be found. Looks like trash, yet inside would be the message from the KGB officer to his agent, instructing the agent where to next meet, what kind of new information to bring the next time, or a money payment, or whatever needed to be communicated. That would be done through this system. And this was employed extensively right around the nation's capital.
KGB officers working in the United States, and specifically in Washington, were limited to a 25-mile radius, meaning that they had to live and work within this radius unless they made official application to the State Department for permission to travel outside the 25-mile radius. If they did so, however, they were usually under surveillance. So most of their clandestine activities had to be carried out within this 25-mile radius. The KGB also had officers working undercover as journalists and commercial positions in Washington. And these were the individuals that the KGB relied frequently to go to meetings and provide dead drops because they didn't believe they were under FBI surveillance. Well, that turned about to be a very fatal and tragic mistake.
In the mid-1980s, the KGB operating in Washington became suspicious. It seemed that the FBI was locating unmarked KGB cars leaving the 25-mile limit with relative ease.
We thought that the bridges across the Potomac River were controlled by the FBI, and if a diplomatic car with a diplomatic license would cross the bridge into Virginia, there is not much in Virginia, with the exception of the Defense Department and the CIA. I mean, all major federal institutions are on this side of the Potomac River. So a diplomat crossing the river, unless he goes to Tyson's Corner or some other shopping area, may have some other agenda.
The FBI had analyzed the routes leaving the limit surrounding Washington. There were only a few ways to leave the city. Many of them involved crossing one of the bridges over the Potomac River.
Major routes, major bridges, in effect, become choke points. The traffic goes through these common points. The FBI secretly planted in the hollow space above the glove compartment in diplomatic vehicles and other vehicles that were owned and used by KGB assets, they put a tiny transponder.
The small transponder lay dormant in the glove compartment of many diplomatic and KGB vehicles.
Just actually above the glove compartment was inserted this tiny passive cavity resonator. And one of the things they added was this tiny battery. And the battery was necessary to give each car a discrete number.
As part of the operation, the FBI broadcast a series of signals at key locations that marked the 25-mile limit around the city.
When the car drove through, the field would interrogate the resonator in the glove compartment, and it would not only indicate that the car was in the loop, but it would transmit the discrete number. So the FBI was not only able to tell that a car was leaving the city or was transiting, but it could tell which specific car it was. It then knew its color, its make, and it was easy to task a surveillance unit or an airplane to catch up with a car. And this was the way that the FBI was secretly tracking the KGB vehicles. And this is the first time that that secret has ever come out publicly.
During the Cold War, U.S. intelligence officers often ran into their own problems while trying to operate in Moscow.
In the mid-1980s, the CIA was concerned that somehow the KGB had developed a way to track their dead drops because CIA assets in Moscow were being arrested. Well, one of the intelligence officers realized that CIA officers, if they're going to leave a dead drop, especially in the winter in Moscow, they would always keep the dead drop, be it a fake rock or a stick. They would keep things well hidden within their coat, in their body. They'd go out for a walk. They'd quickly pull it out from the warmth of their body or their car, and they would hide it and walk out of the area.
The heat from the officer's body would alter the temperature of the dead drop.
When they would go into a park and they would place the drop and quickly walk out of the area, they were leaving an object that was much warmer than the surrounding items.
At the time, the KGB was utilizing infrared technology to spot these drops. Those left by the CIA would cause a heat flare and would easily be detected. Once this was discovered, the CIA had to figure out a way to outsmart the KGB.
So what they did was order from the United States small igloo coolers. And they started keeping these in the embassy vehicles. And they would always keep Coca-Cola in it or different beverages to always have on hand. But the real reason in the ice was actually the dead drops. And the idea was to have the dead drops close to freezing before they placed them down. And they did this as a way to give one additional level of camouflage to the drop.
The KGB also had to be creative to protect caches, materials intended to be hidden for long periods of time.
They would always slaughter a small animal and leave the decomposing corpse of the animal on top of the site. The problem that the KGB found was that if they visited the site several days later, they invariably found that the corpse was gone. And they discovered that other animals were scavenging the corpse. What they had to do was find a way that the corpse would remain in place, because a decomposing animal, people are going to stay away from the area. And they finally found that there was only one known substance that would stop the animals from scavenging the corpse. And it was the one item they happened to have available because it was frequently found in the KGB mess. And what the secret sauce was is Tabasco sauce. And because of its very powerful, aromatic, strong taste, the animals immediately left the area and the corpse was allowed to decompose over the hidden cache.
Coincidentally, CIA officers also found a solution in rodents and spicy sauce for solving their dead drop problems.
With a city as compact as Moscow, with as many intelligence services that are operating there, as well as the KGB training their own people, you have all of the world's intelligence services that are represented there and the host service all looking for the same types of places to leave dead drops. Well, a very clever officer in the CIA said, what would happen if we took a dead animal, like a cat or a dead rodent, a rat, and we'll actually put the film in that, then toss it at the certain site? No one would bother a dead rat.
The CIA began to ship freeze-dried rats from the United States to Moscow. Officers would eviscerate them, put the secret film or message inside, and sew them back up.
And what they had omitted was that there is a large population of very hungry cats that live in Moscow. And the cats were stealing and eating the dead rats. The solution? Hot sauce. They came up with the same answer that the KGB had. And they found that the liberal dose of hot sauce on the freeze-dried rat made it so pungent that no cat would touch it. And this creative method of dead drops was safe.
One of the greatest successes of the Cold War for the Soviets was the recruitment of American spy John Walker. It all began in 1967. Carrying top-secret documents, he literally walked into the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. and offered to spy for them. After verifying the authenticity of the materials and Walker himself, this volunteer became one of the Soviets' most valuable assets.
After you establish his identity and his truthfulness, you have to tell him, you have to be very discreet if you wish to continue. Normally, we arranged for a personal meeting. A personal contact is next in line because we are not prepared to handle the man with, say, dead drops. We do not know him yet. We do not know how he is, whether he is prepared or willing to operate on dead drops. So we have to have a personal meeting, and that's exactly how it happened to, say, John Walker. He was invited to meet in a week or 10 days at a prearranged place.
At the time, it was common for the Soviets to keep a safe house nearby where such a meeting could take place. Walker met there as planned and was briefed on how the operation would work.
We told him that he should not bring classified papers, that he should take pictures of the classified papers and bring them in undeveloped film. That's important. We told him that we shall arrange and organize a series of dead drops. And by the time the meeting did take place, we already had a dozen or so dead drops prepared by our handler.
As time went on and Walker grew more comfortable with his newly found career, he recruited others to be part of his spy ring. They included his brother Arthur, his friend Jerry Whitworth, and even his own son, Michael.
The other people within John Walker's spy ring were selected because they had access to classified materials. In at least one case with Jerry Whitworth, it was cryptographic materials, which was the most valuable. But any classified material, of course, was valuable to the Russians or to the KGB. His brother had access to schedules for various ship loading schedules. He encouraged his son to join the Navy so that he could get access eventually, hopefully, to crypto materials.
The success of the spy ring depended on Walker's collecting all stolen materials and passing them on in a series of scheduled dead drops.
Intelligence services designed dead drop instructions and signal site instructions to be very simple because the spies under stress, they want it to be easy to remember and simple to execute. But with John Walker, there was a different element. They knew that Walker was drinking heavily. They recognized the amount of stress that he was under, and they knew that he was the single most important spy they had and the #1 target for their country. Into the dead drop instructions, they built in a surveillance run so that Walker had an elaborate procedure to follow, and the KGB could, if they chose, be positioned somewhere along this route to see if he was under surveillance.
Walker, however, was known to drink too much, and his behavior was at times unreliable. This resulted in out-of-the-ordinary instructions regarding his dead drops.
Most instructions will provide some safeguards as far as counter-surveillance goes, and also so that the person can find the location with fair ease. 15, 20 minutes is about the longest it would take an individual for most operations. With Walker, the actual procedures that he would go through could be as long as an hour, maybe even longer. And the instructions themselves were quadruple redundant. In other words, he'd be given written instructions as how to proceed and where to drop the material. Along with the written instructions, he would be given maps, and along with the maps and written instructions, he would be given photographs that on the back of the photographs contain more maps and more written instructions. All of of it doing the same identical thing. So they were attempting to make sure, one, he didn't get lost, and that he did get there as he was supposed to, and probably number two, they were just as suspicious as we were of him being somewhat flaky, and in essence, we're concerned that there was a possibility that he could get caught.
In the history of analyzing KGB operations, no one has ever found dead drop instructions that had the level of complexity as those that were destined to be used by John Walker.
Each drop revolved around a series of signals placed by both Walker and the Soviet handler.
Each individual had two signal sites to deal with. Walker would come, place a signal saying that I'm ready to place my materials down, and then he would go look at another signal site that the Russian would be saying, yes, he is ready also. Then they would both place their materials down, and then they would use two other signal sites to say, I have laid my materials down, and you can come and pick them up.
We did not meet him for several years. We just operated on dead drops.
Eventually, Walker began to travel outside the United States to have face-to-face meetings with the Soviets.
We thought highly of the FBI performance. This is why we preferred some neutral countries where the counterintelligence services either were not strong enough or did not care about foreign espionage because they knew the espionage was not conducted against them.
Many of Walker's meetings took place in Vienna. He would be given a set of instructions to follow as to when and where he would meet his handler. This process became known as the Vienna procedure.
The Vienna procedure was called a face-to-face meeting, and a face-to-face meeting is probably the most dangerous time because you have a known, as a rule, known Russian agent in this particular case who is going to meet with your asset.
Wanting to ensure that Walker wasn't followed, the instructions in the Vienna procedure were always extensive.
I went to Vienna and went through the procedure step by step and photographed the entire procedure. And it took me 45 to 60 minutes each time I did it, and I knew exactly where I was going each time. John himself, when he went through the procedure, each time would go for a dry run. Even though he was instructed not to, he would, because again, he needed to know where he was going so he didn't get lost. He was by far their most valuable asset, and they wanted to make sure that he was well counter-surveilled. And number two is they probably realized that he was not the most stable spy in their fold and very well could attract attention easily.
Walker had broken many of the rules the Russians dictated to him to ensure his safety. Large sums of money were spent, and he started to brag about his secret life to family members. Despite all this, the spy ring continued.
We became aware of the spy ring itself through a telephone call by his former wife, Barbara Walker. Barbara Walker called the local office of the FBI and advised that her husband was a spy. When she was interviewed, she was fairly emphatic about some of the facts that were in there, and the agent who interviewed her took down the information and disseminated it to headquarters and to the field offices involved.
Espionage is a very difficult crime to prove. The FBI was surveilling Walker and they had wiretaps on his phone. But to make a conviction stick, they didn't need just circumstantial evidence. They needed to catch him in the act. 1 week, May 1985, they overheard a conversation in which Walker's plans for the following weekend seemed to be unrealistic and impractical. They had a hunch that this was going to be a time that he left a dead drop.
Walker left for his trip, and the FBI followed. As expected, Walker veered off course and headed toward Washington. He began to follow the instructions given for a dead drop.
During the time he was going through the procedures that he was using for the dead drop, unfortunately, the surveillance team lost him. We could not figure out exactly where he was, but eventually we got very lucky and he came back to actually make the drop. The first time was just a dry run.
Walker made his way to the drop site and left the package as planned.
He took took the documents and wrapped them up in a garbage bag, tied them on up, and put them into another garbage bag or grocery bag and placed what we call clean garbage on top of it. And that's just garbage he had around that he'd clean out so it wouldn't leak onto the documents. He brought that to the actual drop site and placed that on out there for the Russian to pick up. And if somebody perchance would have accidentally picked up, all they would have seen was the garbage on the top and disregarded the documents that were folded down into the bottom.
The FBI seized the bag and brought it back to headquarters. The materials inside were laid out and the documents inspected. It was verified that they were indeed classified materials. As it turned out, the FBI had also collected evidence left by Walker at another location, a single soda can. It turned out that this can was the signal to the Russians that the drop had been made. With no signal in place, the Russians continued on without approaching the site.
Walker has left the can. He waits to the prescribed time, drives to the site to find his money, and he can't find any money. His money isn't there. He then goes back to the dead drop site, and he can't find his secrets. The FBI has already been there, found them, and removed them. Walker is perplexed. He doesn't know what to do. Something has gone wrong. But the sequence was so elaborate and so confusing, he thinks there's just been a mistake. So he checks into a nearby hotel.
Somewhere around 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, the decision was made at headquarters to go ahead and arrest Walker in his motel.
Walker was arrested, and eventually his spy ring was taken apart. One by one, they were arrested, convicted, and sentenced to prison terms. The damage of the 18-year operation, however, was more than anyone could have ever imagined.
John Walker, the information he provided, enabled the Russians to read Navy communications, which meant they could decipher and understand the messages that were being sent around to submarines submerged at sea. This is really the key part of our nuclear deterrent. Our ability to have submarines undetected by the Russians with nuclear missiles, and yet the Soviets, in fact, would have known and did know the location of those submarines because they were able to read our communications. So it was tremendously damaging, and certainly in a time of war, it could have been catastrophic.
Although the Cold War has ended, spies continue to operate under the nose of counterintelligence and law enforcement. In recent years, a listening device was found inside the State Department, and a senior FBI agent was arrested and accused of spying for over 15 years. It is believed that much of the information he stole was passed to the Russians through dead drops left around the Washington area. Proof that even today, a country's secrets are fair game in the world of international espionage.